that's true. Naked Palpatine.
Oh, you pick that one. Fresh out of the clone tank, nude Palpatine is my
Well, that's the first thing I think of when you say Dark Empire Palpatine.
Hello everybody and welcome back to the Star Wars Expanded Universe, now by Disney, or Lucasfilm, whichever way you slice it, Legends. Today, I have for you technically, we have a couple things left, but ultimately, the finale to the Bantam era of Star Wars. Visions of the Future by Timothy Zahn. First thing off the bat, 600 pages. 600 pages. No, I'm not letting you off the hook, Zahn. There was no need. There was no need for this book to be 600 pages. At all. There are some books that might justify that length because every page is important to the overall narrative and plot. You did not need 600 pages for this book. You did not need 300 pages for the last book. You could have, if you're gonna make it 600 pages, you could have had a single book. That 300 pages was Spectre of the Past. 300 pages was this. But instead, you have basically a 900-page story that does not justify its length. Biggest complaint on the way. It is far too long. In fact, if you read it in German, this is 3 books. Ridiculous. Ridiculous. Does not need to be that. Just need to get that out of the way first. So, of course, continuing the story off the last book with the Kamos document and the crisis that's going on with that. Luke is going to find Mara. Han and Lando are doing their thing. Leia's with Elagos, who we also saw in I, Jedi, who's trying to, figure out the whole Kamos crisis incident. You have the Imperial Triumvirate of Tears, I remembered his name this time, Dizra, and Flim, and then you have, that's Impellium, trying to figure things out. So a whole mash of things going on. There's a lot of good things in here, a lot of interesting things in here. But at the same time, as the epic conclusion to the Bantam era, it's kind of boring in a lot of sections. It's kind of boring. Anybody who says that this duology is better than the Thrawn trilogy are on acid. Like, they must be drunk or high or something, because there's no way in hell that this is better than the Thrawn trilogy. And if you're Blue Pig watching this and you try to argue again that Bounty Hunter Wars is better than the Thrawn trilogy, you don't get to have an opinion. There's no way in hell this is better than the Thrawn trilogy. It just isn't. But all the power to you if you like it more, I guess. If you like being kind of bored in certain sections. But, I mean, I'm sounding negative. It's a good book, but it just drags and drags and drags and drags. It's just, the biggest issue is its length. Because, especially if you're reading it right after the last one, Spectre of the Past, because it's just a continuation, right? This even more so than, like, the Thrawn trilogy, like, Heirs of the Empire feels like that's a movie, right? It feels like 7, 8, 9. It feels like, all connected, but 3 separate stories, like 4, 5, and 6 are. This duology does not feel like 2 separate movies. It feels like one really, 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 really long movie. And I just have to stress how this book drags and drags and drags. But let me get to some of the things I wanted to talk about, I suppose. One of the cool things in this book, it's not too much, I'm not spoiling the whole book for you, but when these rumors start spreading to Admiral Pellion that Thrawn is still alive, he has no proof of this or anything, doesn't know if he believes it, but still the idea that Thrawn would come back and not come to Pellion does really hurt him, because he thinks that, him and Thrawn kind of had a, not like a romantic relationship, but they had this bond. And so he felt really hurt by the idea that he wouldn't come to him. Now, of course, we all know, again, this might have worked better if we didn't know that Thrawn was not Thrawn, but since we know from book 1, like from the first 100 pages, that Thrawn is an actor, Pellion's grievance over this doesn't mean that much. Because we know that, of course, Thrawn is not betraying Pellion and their relationship, because it's not actually Thrawn. So a very big thing in this book, as we get closer to the Hand of Thrawn revelations, is that there are clones in this book, lots of them, but they're not of Jango Fett, because of course Jango Fett wasn't a thing yet. They're of Baron Sunter Fell, who started off, of course, in the X-Wing comics. I did read a fan fiction. Of course, it's fan fiction, though, so it doesn't count, but it kind of explained the story of how, Baron Fell went from he in the comics it goes Empire to the Republic, and now it goes back to the Empire for the, Hand of Thrawn. And that's by hand, but that's by Hand of Thrawn 45 on it. But of course, it's fan fiction, so it doesn't count. I mean, it tells us the story, but we know by him telling us that Thrawn came to him, and he ended up defecting from the New Republic to join Thrawn's secret Hand of Thrawn. But here we get to see that there are a bunch of clones of Baron Sunterfell, which is really interesting, because Baron Sunterfell is one of the coolest things that Stackpole ever created, which of course Zahn's best friends with Stackpole, so he's heavily weaving Stackpole's things into his novel. We get an iJedi reference with the Janissari, the religious sect in that book, because they used Cortosis armor, and the Cortosis, and then Luke or Mara mentioned how around Palpatine's throne room was Cortosis armor, or Cortosis ore, because Cortosis ore can't really do much against explosions or normal weapons, but a lightsaber cannot penetrate it. So in case any lingering Jedi try to get revenge on him or something, or Vader himself maybe even. Zahn, of course, has to jab at Dark Empire somewhere in this book, because he has to say, "Oh, I think it's stupid that Dark Empire is a thing. I'm Mara, and I don't know if I believe you that Palpatine actually returned," because Zahn just likes to hate on other people who work hard on stuff, but it is what it is there. Leia and Gilead get to meet. I don't know if they met. I don't think they met in the Thrawn trilogy. So it's really cool to see them interact. And again, Pellion's just such a great character. Every time Pellion shows up, it's a good time. Gant really steps up here. It actually reminds me of a video game, Metal Gear Solid. Because Gant's just a slicer dude. He's really smart, but he's an average Joe. He didn't really stand out to me that much in the Thrawn trilogy. But for all intents and purposes, he's a normal dude. He just likes to mess with computers and stuff. So he knows that he's in danger, but he chooses to stick by and help. And I guess I just like in stories when average people step up. And the reason I mentioned Metal Gear Solid is because there's this guy named Otacon in that game, and he's just a nerd. He likes anime and stuff, but he's really smart, and he knows he could die at any moment if he stays, but he chooses to stay to help the main character because it's the right thing to do. And so it's stuff like that. But I really like Gent in this book, or Gent, however you say his name. Of course, again, we have the unfortunate retcon. Now, the in-universe little Band-Aid fix is that Palpatine changed the dating system after he became the Emperor. That's all we can really do. But the book, this is the same thing with the Thrawn trilogy, claims that the, Up on Flight and everything was 60 years ago. Which, remember, this book takes place about 20 years after the Battle of Yavin, whereas the Thrawn trilogy takes place 5 years after. So 5 years, after Episode 6 would be about 30 years. Even though we know now because of the prequels it was been 20 years. So with that added addition, you have about 50 to 60 years, end of the 50s, leading to 60 years since because this is 60 years because it's going past episode 4 to go to the prequel era. So, main point is, it has not been 60 years since Outbound Flight, because that takes place after episode 1. The retcon is that Palpatine changed the dating system after he became Emperor. But, of course, the real explanation that George gave Zahn and everybody else back then a wrong number system of how long the Clone Wars was, because he would later on change it to be only 20 years. Frick. Sorry. That does not happen in a long time. Frick. Sorry. But, you know, so that was a thing. But just for all intents and purposes, just know, when they say 60, it's really only been about 30 years since Outbound Flight. Because that actually works here now to say 30 years, because it's been 20 years since episode 4. So going another 10 years works fine. Or it would actually be a little bit more. Anyway, point being, it's around 30 years, not 60. Everything with Talon Card and Cardass is really interesting, because I believe the last time we saw Cardass is in Outbound Flight. We haven't seen him since. So there's, a lot of missing gaps there with what happened with Cardass. And everything they show with the Ang T monks is really interesting. Now, I haven't read all the West End game stuff. So that stuff may come from there. But, it's really interesting, the stuff that is brought up with the Ang T monks. It's like this different belief and understanding of how the Force works and everything. And it's really cool, because even though some people in this community hate post New Jedi Order, what's interesting is that we get to learn a little bit about them here, and then they're one of the key things that Jason learns about after his 5-year or during his 5-year sojourn. He learns from them, which is really cool. And then we get to meet them again in Fate of the Jedi. So I like that. I think it's really cool. Flim is my favorite of the Imperial Triumvirate. Flim is just like an actor, but he's actually a lot smarter than people, put on. He's like an evil face Lauren, except he's not really evil, but like he's really cool, and he's a lot smarter than people give him credit for, and I really enjoy him. I think he's great. Mara and Lando retcon, again, another thing that Zahn did. So Mara had to make it explicitly clear to Luke in this book that what her and Lando had was purely professional. That when they were seemingly dating, it was only for the mission. They never actually did anything. It's just because Zahn can't let anything slide, I guess, Just could have, why couldn't she just, it didn't have to be even like a real, it could have just been like casual. But no, because Kevin J. Anderson wrote it, so it must be false. So let me retcon that real quick. Whatever. So the big thing with this book, Mara and Luke learn about the Hand of Thrawn organization, which is an organization, and this is not what Zahn intended, because New Jedi Order would introduce the Yusong Vong, but Zahn did want to tease for future stories this unknown threat, this threat that is unlike anything that the characters had ever faced before, and something that's very dangerous and very real, because the whole setup of this book is kind of showing that Thrawn was not purely evil, that everything he did, joining the Empire and all that, was just to get the strongest military might possible to prepare for this threat that would eventually come to the galaxy. And he's been doing this ever since even the prequel era in Outbound Flight, which the Outbound Flight novel would later on call it The Far Outsiders. But Thrawn has been preparing for this threat to the galaxy that would one day come, and that day is coming soon when we get to those reviews. But of course, Zahn didn't know it would be the Vong, but he did set that up here as some big threat that our heroes would have to face in the future, and he sets that up here. And that's what the Hand of Thrawn Society is, a society, made by Thrawn to kind of combat this threat, which is interesting. Of course, then they would go with the Yusong Vong, which are both ideas from Zahn, because the Far Outsider idea from Zahn, and then of course the Ysalamari are beings that, are little bubbles outside the Force, so why don't we make an entire species that's outside the Force, So it's sort of the things that they were doing. learning everything with Baron Sunterfell and everything with that whole organization is really cool. There's a new Thrawn clone being built, which nothing ever happens with that, because that's never a New Jedi Order, Legacy of the Force, or anything. Theoretically, it could pop up after the fact if the EU ever continues, but I don't think it will. I think Thrawn's just dead. But, that was something that Thrawn apparently is trying to do. And then, of course, we learn about other clones in the Jaden Core duology that Thrawn was messing with, so. But we'll get to that far down the line. And then the big twist of this book, which I didn't care. Didn't ask, didn't care. Tierce, who's the ex-royal guard. Well, Tierce died 10 years ago. So what? Tierce is a clone. With like Thrawn's strategic mind in there. Ooh. Aren't you shocked? I don't care. I didn't ask. Didn't want it. But thanks, I guess. I don't care. Anyway, Pelion destroys them. Okay, he doesn't destroy them, but he ends the whole scheme. Okay? The Kamos documents are found. Everything is seemingly settled. Everything's fine. Luke and Mara also, in the perilous dangers that they were in, Luke asked her to marry her, and she said yes. They have not gotten married at the end of this book, but that is in the works. So they're seemingly engaged, I suppose. But he didn't put a ring on it. But they're, for all intents and purposes, by the end of this book, engaged. In fact, we have a comic book series we'll be getting to where they will officially get married. But that's basically it. I think as a whole, this trilogy's fine. I would give this. I mean, I don't do rankings. I think it is a net positive, but it gets very close to a net negative with how much it drags in places. This book is so slow in certain places, but when it gets good, it's really good. But yeah, it's an end of an era. We have like 2 more novels, but this is technically the end of the Bantam era. We have a couple more novels, young adult novels, some short stories, a comic, and then we reread New Jedi Order. So I hope you all join me for that. If you enjoyed this video, give a thumbs up, share it a ton. And if you don't want to drag as much as this book can, then you should definitely subscribe. Until next time, may the Force be with you.